What if I told you that miles beneath your feet, hidden from public view, there are vast underground facilities where the government conducts experiments so classified, even mentioning their existence could put you at risk? Deep beneath the Montana wilderness, a network of tunnels stretches into darkness, holding secrets that would shake the foundations of what we think we know. These aren't just bunkers or storage facilities. They're entire underground cities, known as DUMs, deep underground military bases. I recently received a disturbing account from a civil engineer who worked in one of these facilities. Their story isn't just about classified projects or military secrets, it's about something far more terrifying. The structural integrity of these facilities is failing, threatening to collapse and potentially release whatever they're containing down there. The question isn't just what they're hiding, it's why they're willing to risk everything to keep these operations running.
Secrets of the Woods.
I never expected my background in civil engineering and geotechnical surveying to land me in the middle of a hush-hush operation for the United States government. My day-to-day work usually involves environmental impact assessments, foundation design, and soil stability checks on big projects. Stuff that's interesting if you're into structural loads and subsurface conditions, but hardly the stuff of espionage or covert operations. I was living near Billings, Montana, working a series of smaller projects for the state when a recruiter from a large defense contractor, whose name I won't mention, reached out to me. The initial message came through LinkedIn, though it was cryptic. Your specialized experience in remote subsurface geological analysis may be of interest to an upcoming confidential project. Let's talk. My curiosity was piqued, and the pay they hinted at was about double my usual rate. So, I replied. After a few phone interviews, background checks, and a face-to-face meeting with a serious-looking guy in a black SUV, yes, it felt that cliched, I was offered a contract position. The details were sparse, but the overarching claim was that I'd be assessing and improving structural integrity in a government facility. I still remember the sinking feeling when I was handed a stack of documents to sign: NDAs, security clearance forms, disclaimers about potential psychological stress, and acknowledgments that I'd be working in remote and potentially hazardous environments. I'm no stranger to industrial hazards, collapsing tunnels, old mines, that sort of thing. But the language in these forms went beyond typical disclaimers. It made mention of sensitive materials, classified expansions, and non-standard operational procedures. The more I read, the more uneasy I felt. But the money on the table was life-changing, and the allure of working on something truly out of the ordinary overrode my caution. A week later, I was cleared to travel to the main contractor's field office near Great Falls, Montana. From there, I was driven several hours northwest, deeper into the mountainous region. By the time we arrived at the remote site, the sun was dipping behind jagged peaks, and I was exhausted from the long day. My guide, an ex-military type named Coulson, barely spoke other than to say, "Keep your eyes forward, keep your mouth shut until I tell you otherwise." He was polite enough, but the no-nonsense tone in his voice told me this was serious business. The entrance to what I later learned was a DUM, a deep underground military base, was hidden in a gorge that looked totally unremarkable. A small gravel road led to a concrete loading dock area carved into the rock, with a corrugated steel door large enough to fit a semi-truck. No signage, no flags, no stars and stripes. Nothing that screamed U.S. government. We passed through multiple checkpoints, each with armed guards and electronic scanners. My retinas were scanned, my fingerprints checked, and my face compared to a series of official documents. When we finally passed the final checkpoint, we entered a sloped tunnel that led us deep into the mountain. The sensation was surreal, especially for me, a civilian who'd never been in a place like this. Coulson escorted me to a Spartan dormitory area, essentially a small room with a bed, a desk, and a single overhead light. It felt more like a bunker than a living space. He handed me a key card, told me lights out was at 2200 hours, and that I'd have an orientation at 0600 sharp. As he left, I noticed the thick steel door hiss when it closed, sealing the room with a finality that made my heart pound. It struck me that I was now in a place few civilians ever see, locked behind layers of concrete, steel, and secrecy. Yet, none of that prepared me for the weirdness that would soon unfold. At 0600 the next morning, I met with Dr. Marta Alvarez, a lead scientist overseeing structural expansions and special research projects. She wore a crisp uniform without insignia, apparently standard in these unacknowledged facilities. Dr. Alvarez was direct. "We'll be conducting expansions into newly cleared tunnel sectors. Your expertise in geological stability is crucial. This facility houses sensitive equipment and materials that cannot be compromised by structural failures." She didn't go into specifics about what kind of equipment and materials, but the seriousness of her tone implied it was more than standard military hardware. We spent the next hour going over topographical maps, cross-sections of the mountain, and seismic data. I recognized the mountain range we were in from some of my earlier civilian projects, though this map included layers of compartments and shafts I'd never dreamed existed. The base was massive, extending miles beneath the surface, with multiple levels, corridors, labs, storage facilities, and even an underground rail system. According to the documents, the deeper sections reached over 4,000 feet below ground level. That's deeper than many well-known mines in the region. My job? Evaluate the rock strata in a new sector codenamed Level S4, a nod to Area 51's S4, I wasn't sure, and identify potential issues with existing geological faults. Dr. Alvarez stressed that the expansions had to be done quietly to avoid external detection. Apparently, the DUM operated under the radar, using advanced noise cancellation drilling techniques so as not to attract attention from the outside world. The official story for any suspicious ground vibrations would be routine mining activity. She also mentioned that the region was geologically complex, with pockets of magma intrusions and unusual electromagnetic readings that interfered with some of their equipment. I had a million questions. Who built the base initially? How long had it been operational? Why such extensive expansions now? But I was too overwhelmed and intimidated to probe. They told me only what I needed to know, and my clearance wasn't at the top tier. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine. Wake at 0500, quick meal in the subterranean cafeteria, then onto the site with a small team of engineers and security personnel. The tunnels were dimly lit, with overhead fluorescent strips and occasional LED clusters. The air was cool and a bit stale, circulated by industrial ventilation systems. We'd pass other personnel, scientists, technicians, or soldiers who barely acknowledged our existence. Everyone moved with a purpose, no idle chatter. While performing my inspections, I noticed unmarked doors with heavy locks, labs sealed behind multiple biometric checkpoints, and corridors that required different levels of access. A couple of times, I caught glimpses of people wearing hazmat suits scurrying into restricted areas. Other times, I heard low-frequency hums emanating from behind thick steel walls. The environment was oppressive, and the sense of secrecy weighed heavily on me. I kept telling myself I was just there to do a job and not to ask too many questions. But the sense that something bigger was going on was impossible to ignore. One evening, after a long day mapping fault lines and verifying the stability of a newly excavated tunnel, I returned to my dorm-style room. I tried calling my wife. There was a small comm station for secure external calls, but the line was down. It wasn't unusual for communications to be spotty or heavily monitored, but it added to my frustration. I decided to write some notes on my laptop, which never left my side, and turned in early. Sometime after lights out, I jolted awake to an eerie silence. Typically, you can hear the faint hum of the ventilation system or distant machinery, but now it was dead quiet. I checked my watch. It was around 02:30. My heart hammered, and I instinctively reached for my phone, forgetting for a moment that there's no cell reception this deep underground. As I swung my legs off the bed, a soft glow flickered under the door. At first, I thought it might be a guard or technician passing by with a flashlight. Then I realized the light had a strange quality, pulsing, bluish white, like a subdued strobe. I crept over, pressing my ear against the metal. I heard a faint buzzing, almost an electrical crackling, reminiscent of high-voltage arcing. Against my better judgment, I cracked the door open, just enough to peer into the corridor. I saw no one, but the entire hallway seemed to pulse with that faint bluish light, as if it were emanating from the floor or the very air itself. The overhead fluorescence flickered erratically. The buzzing grew louder, and for a split second, I swear I saw shadows moving along the wall, shadows that didn't correspond to any figure or object. They crawled and writhed, twisting in ways that defied logic. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. The lights returned to normal, the buzzing vanished, and the corridor was empty once again. My heart was in my throat, and I stood there trembling and drenched in cold sweat. I debated stepping out to investigate, but fear won out. I closed the door and locked it, my mind racing with possibilities. A power surge, some experimental tech being tested after hours, or something even stranger. The next morning, the corridor looked exactly as usual. I discreetly asked a security guard if there'd been any electrical issues overnight. He gave me a blank stare, said, "None that I'm aware of, sir," and walked away. No mention of flickering lights or the odd phenomenon I'd seen. It left me feeling unsettled, and it was just the first of many bizarre occurrences I'd witnessed in that base. A week later, I was granted provisional access to Level S4, the deeper site where expansions were taking place. To get there, I had to ride an industrial elevator that descended for what felt like eternity. The base had levels labeled up to S6, from what I could glean, but S5 and S6 were apparently restricted to top clearance only. I could only wonder what might be down there. Level S4 was a labyrinth of freshly cut tunnels and thick structural columns. Large mechanical rigs, some conventional, some oddly advanced, were parked in alcoves. My job was to confirm that the surrounding rock wouldn't shift or collapse under certain loads. Dr. Alvarez told me that they were planning to install massive containment units in the newly hollowed caverns, though she wouldn't say what they'd contain. On my second day down there, I was accompanied by Captain Harlow, a gruff security officer who escorted me and two other engineers. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone seemed on edge. We could hear distant drilling, and the rumble of machinery echoing through the tunnels, though the source was never in sight. As we proceeded deeper, I noticed a sticky residue on some of the tunnel walls, like a light film of dark, oily liquid. When I asked Captain Harlow about it, he just grunted that it was a byproduct of the specialized drilling fluid, but the fluid reeked of ozone and something chemical I couldn't place. Definitely not your standard drilling lubricant. While examining a particularly large fault line, I found a set of strange scratch marks in the rock. They looked too deep and irregular to be from the machinery. It was as if something with huge claws had gouged the stone. I pointed them out to Harlow, who told me, "This is why we keep the expansions classified. Don't want folks spooked by weird geological formations." Something in his voice, however, suggested he knew more than he was letting on. My colleagues just shrugged and went back to scanning the rock with ground-penetrating radar. Later that evening, Captain Harlow left me alone in one of the new caverns so I could finalize my inspection. I was half a mile from the elevator shaft, surrounded by silent rock except for the drip of water seeping from overhead fissures. The sense of isolation weighed on me, but I forced myself to focus. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a flicker of movement at the far edge of the cavern near a cluster of boulders. I called out, expecting maybe a technician or security personnel. No reply. I walked closer, shining my flashlight, and for a fleeting moment, I swear I heard a soft whispering sound, like multiple voices whispering at once. Then silence. I found no sign of anyone else there. No footprints, no workers. But the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. That was the moment I started to believe that these tunnels might house more than just mechanical rigs and hush-hush government tech. Something else was at play. Over the ensuing days, I pieced together whatever rumors I could glean from hushed hallway conversations and cryptic remarks by staff. Unexplained disappearances. A guard told me in a lowered voice that 2 staff members vanished a few months prior. Officially, they were transferred to another facility, but no one ever saw them leave. Odd biological specimens. One technician claimed he'd overheard a conversation about quarantine protocols in one of the upper labs. He insisted they were storing something alive, though he had no clue what it might be. Ancient caverns. A geologist confided that some of the deeper levels weren't man-made at all. There were natural caverns with prehistoric fossils and rumors of petroglyphs hidden away. The government might be using or expanding upon an existing network of underground caverns that stretch for miles. Electromagnetic interference. Everyone complained that their compasses, GPS units, and even watch batteries died unexpectedly in certain tunnel sectors. Some said it was just localized magnetite deposits, but others whispered about advanced energy fields or dimensional rifts. I've never been one to buy into conspiracy theories wholesale, but every day in that base chipped away at my skepticism. My direct superiors said little, and Dr. Alvarez stuck to clinical explanations. Yet the tension in the corridors was palpable. People walked quickly, avoided eye contact, and seemed to speak in hushed tones, as if they were afraid they'd be overheard by more than just security cameras. Meanwhile, my geological surveys were nearly complete, and I was scheduled for a final debrief. A sense of relief battled with a nagging desire for answers. Would they let me leave with my memories intact? Or would they subject me to some memory clearance protocol? The NDA I signed rattled through my mind. I told myself not to pry further, to just do my job and get out. But you can't unsee the things you've witnessed, and some part of me was determined to understand the bigger picture. About a week before I was supposed to finish my contract, I was awakened abruptly at 0430 by a shrill alarm. A computerized voice echoed through the hallways. All personnel report to designated muster stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. My stomach dropped. I threw on my jumpsuit and rushed out to find people running in both directions, some in uniform with weapons drawn, others in lab coats looking panicked. A guard redirected me to a muster station in the cafeteria area. We waited there for nearly an hour, no one telling us anything except to remain calm. The alarm eventually silenced, replaced by a tangible tension in the air. I overheard frantic radio transmissions. Containment breach in Sector S5. Another voice replying, "We need a hazard team now." The older woman beside me, a communications specialist, looked as pale as a sheet. She whispered that S5 was rumored to be a bioresearch wing. By midday, the lockdown lifted, and I was escorted back to my room, told to stay there until further notice. My door locked from the outside, which had never happened before. Through the small window in the door, I watched staff sprinting past, some carrying medical supplies, others wearing tactical vests. My mind spun with possibilities. Had some experimental pathogen gotten loose? Or had that alive cargo escaped? I tried occupying myself by reviewing my seismic data, but every few minutes, I heard faint explosions or thumps reverberating through the facility's structure. By nightfall, the power flickered repeatedly, and the temperature in my room dropped. The vents sputtered as though the air filtration system was struggling. Eventually, around 2:20, a guard unlocked my door and summoned me to a briefing with Dr. Alvarez. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. She attempted a reassuring smile but failed. "We've had a situation in one of the restricted sectors. The important thing is you're safe, and it's been contained. However, all external departures are suspended until we conduct a thorough safety check." She paused, as if weighing her words. "Your final departure date may be delayed, possibly by a few days, maybe more." Before I could protest, she added, "I'm sure you understand the sensitivity. This facility must remain secure at all costs." Her tone brooked no argument. I left the briefing more confused than ever, with no clue what had transpired, only that it was serious enough to lock down the entire base. That night, the corridor outside my room was patrolled by pairs of armed guards. I heard them muttering about unusual footprints and residual fluid left behind. One guard joked grimly about science projects gone wrong. My imagination ran wild, conjuring images of mutated creatures or alien life forms. Sleep was impossible. The forced delay meant I had time on my hands, and curiosity got the better of me. After a couple of days of lockdown, the base seemed to settle into an uneasy calm. They lifted some restrictions, allowing limited movement for essential personnel. My role was considered essential because they still needed me to finalize safety checks in S4, ensuring no structural damage had occurred during whatever chaos broke out. I took advantage of the new freedom to slip away from my usual route, exploring side corridors in the mid-levels. I knew I risked severe repercussions if caught, but a part of me felt compelled to uncover the truth. Along an isolated passage marked authorized personnel only, I found a door that required a higher clearance. Luckily, I'd once seen Dr. Alvarez enter her override code in a moment of carelessness. My photographic memory recalled the sequence of digits and letters. I typed it in, half expecting an alarm, but the door clicked open. Inside, I found an observation room with large, reinforced windows, overlooking what appeared to be a lab or more accurately, a containment area. Rows of sturdy glass enclosures line the walls, each equipped with complex instrumentation. Thick cables snaked across the floor, connecting to machines that beeped and hummed with no external labels. Most of the enclosures were empty, but a few contained ominous stains or fragments of something. Blood? Tissue? I couldn't be sure. At the far end of the room, one enclosure was lit by a harsh overhead lamp. My stomach turned as I realized it contained what looked like some kind of biological entity. Pieces of it anyway. It might have been reptilian or amphibian, with slick, dark skin. Tubes protruded from it, pumping fluid in and out. The creature, or remains of it, didn't appear to be moving, but an occasional twitch in one limb suggested it wasn't entirely dead. A placard on the glass read Specimen R34X, Phase 4 Trials. I suppressed the urge to vomit. This was far beyond my realm of understanding. Government experiments on what exactly? Genetic hybrids? Extraterrestrial organisms? My mind swam with possibilities. Was this related to the breach in S5? I snapped a few quick photos with my phone, though I doubted I'd ever be able to share them publicly without risking everything. Suddenly, footsteps approached. A lab technician entered the observation room, spotted me, and froze. For a tense moment, we locked eyes. I expected him to raise an alarm. Instead, he looked defeated, merely saying, "You shouldn't be here." I stammered an apology, but he didn't press the matter. I hurried out, my heart pounding. That night, I barely slept. All the rumors, biological research, containment breaches, hidden caverns, suddenly seemed terrifyingly real. The base was not just a secret underground fortress. It was a labyrinth of unethical experiments, or maybe something even bigger. The question was, why? Amid all the secrecy, I still had a job to do. Officially, the base was counting on me to confirm the stability of the expansions on S4, so they could proceed with whatever big equipment they planned to install. Despite the madness of the last few days, Dr. Alvarez was adamant. We need that final report. So I returned to S4 with a heavy heart and a swarm of questions. This time, though, I noticed something troubling in the seismic data. The reactivated drilling, combined with some unexplained subterranean shifts, had caused microfractures in the bedrock. My instruments indicated a possible instability along a major fault line that ran beneath the facility. If they kept expanding or subjecting the area to more stress, they risked a partial collapse. In normal circumstances, this would be enough to halt all construction, or at least call for major reinforcements. But when I tried to raise these concerns, I was met with stony faces. Captain Harlow, who accompanied me, insisted, "We can reinforce it. The expansions will continue as planned." His tone left no room for debate. When I pressed him, he shot me a glare that said, "Do not push this." I felt stuck in an ethical dilemma. Do I sign off on structural stability that I'm not convinced is truly safe? Or do I blow the whistle and risk the wrath of whoever runs this place? The fear of what might happen if I angered these people was real, yet the potential for catastrophic collapse weighed on my conscience. During one of my final walkthroughs in the deepest part of S4, I discovered a cavern that wasn't on any official blueprint. A rough-hewn tunnel branched away, no sign of mechanical excavation marks. It looked naturally formed or carved by older technology. Odd symbols were etched into the walls, spirals, geometric shapes, and something that resembled cuneiform script. The air here was colder, and my flashlight caught glints of a blackish mineral embedded in the stone that seemed to pulse faintly when the beam hit it. I felt a low hum reverberate through the floor. The sensation was eerie, almost supernatural. Out of nowhere, I heard that whispering again, soft, overlapping voices. I spun around, flashlight shaking. Nothing there. My imagination? Or something else? The hair on my arms stood up as if a static charge coursed through the cavern. My equipment beeped erratically, losing calibration. In that moment, it felt like the very fabric of reality was thinner in that hidden passage. I retreated quickly, heart hammering in my chest. Later, I looked up references to ancient or indigenous symbols in Montana, but I couldn't find anything that matched exactly. It occurred to me that maybe the government had built over something extremely old, predating any known cultures. If so, their expansions might be disturbing forces they didn't understand. The next day, I confronted Dr. Alvarez one last time. I showed her the data about the fault line and microfractures. It's dangerous, I warned, and the expansions are only making it worse. She didn't deny it, but her face clouded with concern. She simply said, "We have directives from higher up. The expansions must continue. We'll address the structural concerns with advanced materials. This project can't be halted." I mustered the courage to ask directly about the breach in S5 and the biological experiments. She stiffened, replying, "You don't have clearance for that. Focus on your assignment, and you'll be compensated accordingly." That's when I knew I had to get out. My professional and moral integrity wouldn't let me stay silent. But leaving a DUM is not as simple as walking out the front door. Even though I was near the end of my contract, the entire base was on high alert after the recent incident. Departures were still restricted. My final push came when I heard that the next set of expansions would blast through part of the hidden cavern I'd found. The notion of them destroying or modifying that ancient space, and possibly unleashing more unknown phenomena, frightened me more than any consequence. I decided I'd leverage the threat of a catastrophic collapse to force them to let me leave. I prepared a formal written report detailing the instabilities, referencing the risk of widespread damage if the expansions proceeded without extensive additional support. Unexpectedly, a chance to escape presented itself. A small group of personnel from the Department of Energy arrived to inspect the base's power systems. They were departing in a convoy at the end of the week. Usually, these convoys were thoroughly screened, but chaos still lingered in the air, and security was somewhat disorganized. I asked if I could hitch a ride with them, citing urgent personal matters. Dr. Alvarez tried to stall me, but I insisted I'd filed my final geological report. I also hinted that I'd contact higher-ups if they refused to let me out. She relented, albeit grudgingly. On the day of departure, I packed my notes carefully, but I had to hide them. If the guards found them, they'd likely confiscate or destroy them under classification protocols. I concealed data in the form of innocuous spreadsheets on a flash drive, titled something like Rock Density Analysis Project Redwood. I wore a calm facade, but internally, I was boiling with anxiety. As I stepped into the convoy vehicle, I glanced one last time at the heavy steel doors, the armed guards, and the ominous mountain looming overhead. The sense of relief I felt leaving that facility was immense, yet tinged with the knowledge that I'd witnessed only a fraction of its secrets. Once I was out, I spent a week at a nondescript hotel in Great Falls. My first call was to my wife, letting her know I was safe, but that I couldn't discuss the details. The contractor deposit hit my bank account, a hefty sum that nearly made me choke. Part of me felt dirty accepting the money, but I rationalized that I'd earned it, physically, mentally, and morally. In the weeks that followed, I tried to return to some semblance of a normal life, yet I couldn't shake the nightmares. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, visions of flickering corridor lights, that bluish glow, and the whispering voices echoing in my mind. My phone rang a few times from unlisted numbers, only static on the line. One day, an unmarked envelope arrived at my door, containing a single photograph. A blurry shot of me entering that restricted lab area. A silent warning, I assumed, reminding me to keep quiet. Despite this intimidation, I feel compelled to share my experiences, at least anonymously. People deserve to know that deep beneath the Montana mountains, a labyrinth of tunnels and caverns houses more than just standard military equipment. There are advanced experiments, biological, technological, or something else. There are corridors that hum with strange energy and older caverns etched with symbols that defy conventional explanation. And yes, there are structural instabilities that could one day result in a catastrophic event. I don't pretend to have all the answers. In fact, I probably have more questions than I started with. What exactly did they breach in level S5? Are those experiments the result of extraterrestrial research, genetic engineering, or something else entirely? If you guys enjoyed today's stories, be sure to smack that like and subscribe button so you don't ever miss another episode of Secrets of the Woods. I'll see you all in the next episode.